Welcome to value creation in the M&A lifecycle, leading up to liquidity. This session is presented by 12 Points Wealth Management. Let's meet the panel. First, we have Peter McLaughlin, owner, ARC National. Next, Mark Sherman, founder, Congruity 360. We welcome David Model, COO, Triton Systems. And our moderator, Dave Clayman, co-founder, 12 Points Wealth Management. Dave, take it away.
Excellent. Thanks for joining this session on value creation. Let's learn a little bit more about the background of my fellow panelists here. Peter, could you tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. I'm executive chairman of ARC Behavioral Health, company focused on addiction treatment services. Also CEO of Boston Property Development, which is a suite of vertically integrated real estate companies.
Great. Thank you. And Peter?
Mark. So co-founder of Congruity 360. I've been probably 40 years or so in IT entrepreneurship. So I sit on several boards. I do a bunch of advisory work, help fund folks with fundraising, an IPO under my belt, a couple almost IPOs, and maybe 30 M&As.
Wow. So sorry about the confusion on the names. So I'm Dave Clayman. I'm the founder and chairman, CEO of 12 Points Wealth Management. We act as advisors to corporate executives. So wanted to talk a little bit today, obviously, about value creation and what you've experienced in your careers in creating value within companies. We personally here at 12 Points use the value acceleration methodology in our practice, where clients first take a personal readiness assessment, and then they take a business attractiveness assessment, and that helps them to decide what they need to do in order to be prepared for exiting their business, but also to create value while they still own the business. Once we know those two factors, it allows us to set them off on two tracks, one led by their personal financial advisor to determine getting their affairs in order and making sure that everything is going to satisfy their personal needs, and then one led by a value advisor to learn about how they can increase the value of the business as they go. How did you see your companies create and maximize value as you went through your various exits?
Well, so I have experience both from pure private as well as venture-backed companies. The venture-backed companies exit was sort of part and parcel of the discussion and narrative from the very beginning. I think the key is to be able to show a fair amount of customer traction, also to be able to articulate how that continues to grow, both in terms of margins, in terms of top line, having a very defined go-to-market, and staying very close to the message. I think one of the big mistakes people make is keep shifting the message, keep looking for additional add-on businesses. Those are things that can confuse potential acquirers or investors going forward, and something to be avoided at all costs. So being very clear to the message, being very clear to the business and strategy, and then executing against it.
As it relates to ARC Behavioral Health, which is the largest of the equity investments that I've taken, every real estate deal, of course, has its own equity investment. It's a whole nother line of business. What we did, of course, is we saw the need, right? The opioid crisis has been a pretty massive phenomenon in the country for a while now, and it was exacerbated quite a bit by COVID. We put best practices in place as it relates to the clinical treatment. A big component of being able to provide the service is also real estate, which is very difficult to get properly entitled in the space. It's one of the typical NIMBY type of challenges that you have. No one wants it in their backyard. So having a team that had the ability to get through those entitlements, and having a team that was focused on a clinical treatment and getting a high quality product out there had been key and is still key. As we've evolved and we drove it toward a profitable company, and we took our first equity investment in, the message is pretty clear. It's, build the executive leadership team, make sure you have experts at all the phases of the business. Obviously, a strong CFO, strong legal counsel. Technology is critical in our space. Helping to define outcomes in our space is challenging, and we'll continue to work on that. And then, making sure that the team that you built is scalable, and scalability is massive. Having continuity as it relates to your softwares that you can then, as you go into different states, make sure you're onloading the acquisitions or the de novos into that scalable platform, and that continuity of executive leadership team and the scalability of business have been key for us thus far.
So I want to echo what Peter just said too. I think we were talking about this before the panel began, but that team, the creation of the executive team, the leadership team, and the continued evolution of that, super important. You're dealing with people that might be private companies, family businesses that might sell, or they could be venture backed. Either way, not being able to show a strong sort of collaborative team, but also the folks behind them that would continue to sort of grow the business. If there's an exit, then folks may be retiring, they may not be as focused. So what happens to the folks behind that keep the business going and keep it growing? So I think in terms of value creation in general, it's very important to serve and continue to grow your team. Always look for ways that you can advance people from within, and try not to be hiring outside unless there are specific roles or that's just the evolution of the business. To the extent you can do that, that continuity is super important. It's also super important to the message. Everybody sort of lives and breathes what that strategy is, and they can grow from it.
And one other part of I guess talking about value creation, I think picking your investor and making sure, one, there's alignment, and two, that they can add ideally strategic value to your space. They would have known a lot of key executives in the space, obviously the strategy of the space, and the communication with them, first picking the correct one, but then leaving the doors open, really listening to what they say, as a lot of them have purview not only over your company, but they've talked to 20 or 30 other companies in your space. So I'm always very keen to hear what they have to say, at the board meetings in particular, when you get a good 4 hours together, we can really bat ideas around, and making sure that, you're open to receiving what the messages they're telling you, because chances are they've honed them over a longer period of time and across a lot more variety of companies than you have, obviously.
I could not agree more. An investor told me once that venture guys generally are professional board sitters. They sit through board meetings all day long, so they know when a CEO or management team is giving them the spin. So again, looking for that right match, but also being very upfront and honest about where the business is, what's working, what's not, and where the changes are that you need to go forward. That same narrative is as important when you start talking to potential acquirers. You can sell. You get to an LOI, you get to diligence, and it all falls apart. So, be very, very clear on where you are with the business, be upfront, and, deal with integrity. It gets unwound anyway, and you get to the yes or no that much faster.
Yeah, a good example of that in our space is, obviously you want to maximize EBITDA and net income, and that's how we measure value creation, right? But ultimately, it's, are you exitable, right? It's not what are you at the highest EBITDA possible. It's, are you solving the problems for all the stakeholders in your company? And being in behavioral health, it's not just the people that are having challenges with addiction and drugs and alcohol. Yes, we know how to solve their problems. We have clinicians and we have a very well-run process, but it's also the insurance companies, right? So maximizing the value of the company and building a strong relationship with insurance companies can be at odds potentially with each other. Insurance companies want affordability for all, right? So although you may be getting a short-term bump, you need to have a long-term strategy that takes care of all those stakeholders in our particular business.
We were talking about team and how important teams are and all the constituents. And I was about to say, we believe that companies are ultimately valued on their 4 C's, their capital, if you will. Their human, their employees, their customer, their structural efficiency or profitability, and their social culture. So in other words, how strong is your internal team? How's the culture of the company? Is that promoting growth? How efficient are you? How does that translate to your EBITDA or your margins? and then also how broad is your customer base. So maybe if each of you could tell me a little bit about how those may have positively or negatively affected value in your history. So, Dave, I don't know if you, since you're, this is a question you get to answer.
I'll start. Sure. I think they're absolutely critical. All of that is critical. I think I saw your notes from before, and I think the human capital is the most important thing. Really, the people make the companies typically, and so with human capital comes the culture. If you have the kind of culture that encourages, innovation, hard work, honest interchange, etc., I mean, that's going to get you the best people and help you retain the best people. And conversely, if you don't, you won't hold on to good people. So I put those two at the top. And then third is the customer focus. You can never lose customer focus. You really need to understand what the customer's pain point is and how you're addressing it, how you're building value. I actually think, and it surprised me to come to this conclusion, but I actually think in my history that structural efficiency is not that important. There's a question later in the questions you asked that, Dave, that about, whether an acquirer can basically fix a problem. I think you can always fix a poorly run, poor processes can be fixed with better processes. That's not that hard to do. And if you have real value and you have the right people, a lot of times in fast growth, there's a lot of stuff that doesn't get done right. It's not efficient. It got stovepiped. It got ad hoc made, and eventually you come back and you streamline it with procedures and better that. But those can be fixed. What you can't fix is the heartbeat, right? The good people and the good ideas. So that's my order.
Yeah, I can't agree more. They're both intertwined for sure. And in this day and age, and again, I've been mostly working in technology where it's tough to find good people. It's tough to scale with them. And that has become that much more acute. So your ability to be able to build and grow a management team, I often refer to a concept I think of as servitude management. So our job as executives is to make all the people that work for us that much better, to enable them so they can also enable the folks that work for them. That continues to allow the business to grow and scale, and it translates into EBITDA. If you're not spending money on additional recruiting on people, if you can keep that knowledge flowing, it translates maybe not directly dollar for dollar, aside from recruiting stuff. It does translate into the bottom line. That turnover, when I ran a business called Glasshouse Technologies for many years, and it was high tech, fast growing. And our turnover, both voluntary and involuntary, about 700 people worldwide, was less than 5%. That was a big value creator in so many different ways, not the least of which the amount of tribal knowledge that was built up with our customers, with the processes and things like that, it was a real driver for efficiency.
Absolutely. I mean, I would echo, obviously, what both of you are saying. I think that if you're going to have a successful business, you're going to have your customers, you're going to have some elements of structure and efficiency, right? I mean, or you're not going to even have a business, right? And you can improve those over time, make them better. But I do think it's the culture is the number one thing, right? In human capital, in culture, we're really talking about the same thing. We have 500 employees. It's a fair amount to manage and some very good managers. But one of the most impactful things in the last several years at ARC was the Christmas party, right? You want to talk about a cultural event. Everyone's been cooped up with COVID. Yes, we have, and we don't think it was a super spreader event. And it was amazing. The CEO, Rich McDonald, who's a recovering addict, he started the company along with me, him more as a manager. I was very heavily involved in M&A and finance side. He got up and spoke, and he spoke to a room full of 150 people. In a way that candidly I'd never heard him speak, and he and I have been best friends since high school. And he was followed up by the medical director, and her message was super powerful. Like, she joined the company early on when it was risky for her to do so, and she tied that into a story about how she helped save her nephew's life before her uncle passed away. And then it finished with the mayor of our hometown, who supported us in the entitlements because he gave a message of his constituents was saying all these deaths from COVID were happening, and he knew us. and he wanted support. But it was just a wildly powerful night for everyone in the room, and it just speaks to culture and chemistry and human capital. And it was a great night.
You all spoke about the importance of that team and the people that are working. And so I guess, especially today, labor is one of the highest top of mind issues. How should a seller approach his or her team to ensure the stability, retention, recruiting, all those things are so hard. What about the seller's commitment to stay in the business? What terms have you seen work well? And how might that impact financial liquidity?
I'll give a shot at this. A lot of it goes back to what Peter mentioned before, which is picking the right partner. That's the same for the acquirer. There's a lot of firms out there, this is not good or bad, that are buying a business and they're hoping to grow, make it more profitable, grow top line, whatever, over 2 or 3 years, and then spin and sell it. And that is a very big and very vibrant market through that process. I think the only way you can probably mitigate that somewhat in terms of the staff is to give them a piece of whatever continues to go and grow. They're incented to grow. They see enterprise value. They get to be part of the transaction. So it's not just a few guys making a ton of money and necessarily walking away and leaving them behind. This day and age, people are less loyal and more mobile, and there's plenty of opportunities for them to go ahead and do that. So I think it's about finding the right partner. That could be a minority equity partner, or it could be an acquirer for the business, whatever that is. The business is going to have its own characteristics, its culture. There may be different kinds of drivers in terms of what their incentives are for bringing in an equity person or selling the business, and try to make sure as best as possible to make sure that that's aligned. Otherwise, it's a good way to watch that business sort of go down the tubes.
And I want to build one more thing on what you said too. The idea of how important it is that you understand your goals for the acquisition, because you can lose your culture, and knowing how comfortable you are going to be with either walking away because it isn't what you expected and okay, let the business go, or is the business going to be the legacy you hoped for? And that can be a real challenge. We had a client that just sold last year, and he sold before he became our client. And 6 months in, he walked away from about $10 million worth of options because he didn't want to be private equity's, puppet, if you will, as he put it. Not my words, his. And just understanding that challenge. So if any of you have experience with that, I'd love to hear your comments on that.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a lot of good and bad. Early in my career, I was running a small company that we sold to GE, and I watched over time. I stayed with it for a couple of years, and GE just grounded into GE, and they didn't mean to, but big companies, big acquirers, just have a way of sort of forcing it into their mold, and you're going to probably eventually lose the entrepreneurs who started it because the philosophy will be different. But on the other hand, it's not a bad outcome. Generally, it's a decent financial outcome for people, and it'll be a different company. On the flip side, we've also sold to entrepreneurs who, don't share sort of our corporate vision because we're more of a corporation, and take it in a different direction. And sometimes people like that, sometimes people don't. So I think the first responsibility, I think you made a very, very good point, Dave. Like, the sellers need to be very clear what they want out of it. And I'd say protecting employees, we have a responsibility to make sure that our employees are fairly compensated anyway. And in a deal, they should also be properly incentivized so that they are rewarded because they built the value, and that could be some piece of an earnout, could be equity, could be a lot of things. But eventually, that's not our responsibility over time. If that acquiring organization has a different view, or if the people diverge, okay, it shouldn't be a bad outcome for them. I don't think trying to do like what your friend did and undo a deal because it didn't turn out that right way, you didn't think it through enough in the first place, I'd say.
Yeah, I haven't had any exits in that regard. I mean, we're scaling up still. But one thing, when we engage with our investor, one thing we discussed up front prior to his investment was, hey, let's set up an employee, profits interest pool. And I think, we were 100% on board with that. Didn't have to twist our arms. We had already done it. We already shared a fair amount of equity with some of the key executives. And that's the next level, next layer of talent, right? And those guys being incented into the future with, vesting options, whatever the deal structure is. I think it's a key component to, getting an acquirer comfortable. Then not only the principal is going to be committed for a certain amount of time, but a fair amount of the key executive leadership team is going to be incented going forward as well.
That did raise one other thought that might be slightly off topic, but when we're talking about being prepared and what you need to think about as the owner, we always say you need to prepare yourself for sale because it's going to be different. Your world's going to be different after the baby you built is no longer yours. And it's also your personal life from that. So we always describe it as we believe in having a plan so that it's for better or worse, but not for lunch. Because full-time housing in the same space can be a little different. So, and then you had experience seeing that kind of thing and what that preparation for the next, knowing what you were going to do next before you even get out the first time, maybe what that was like.
Yeah, I agree. So it really does come down to, why are you doing this, right? Are you doing it to scale the business and you're just there, or are you doing it because this is your retirement plan? No wrong answer there. But again, being honest with yourself about what that is. I think Dave mentioned it's unlikely when you're acquired that business will continue with the same culture, the same way it was before. Just won't. It's not a bad thing. It's just the very first business I built was acquired by a much larger organization that wanted to get into tech. But they were kind of an very old school company. There was no way small little business that they acquired was going to change the culture of folks that have been in a business for 25 or 30 years. Financially, it was fine. And, ultimately it might have worked out for some of the individuals that were involved, I guess me, and others, but in terms of loving the business after it was done, it was just very, very different. And I think it's about being honest with yourself. If you're looking to cash out and play golf, then say so and do that and go where it is. Again, it comes back again to the team. You're being able to communicate with them, setting expectations before and afterwards of what's really going to happen. And then trying to align yourself with the right acquirer or investors that at least understand that with you. And it's not just a financial transaction. And if it is, then everybody should be clear about it.
Clear expectations are definitely key. As we build off kind of those 4 C's I talked about a little earlier, we all seem to agree that culture and human capital were the most important, but obviously in the current world, customer can be important too. So, we're living in a world with serious supply chain issues right now. Much of what's happening is impacting M&A. We've seen significantly different valuations for companies that have single large customers and a diverse customer base, but now also the same on the supplier side. How do each of you think the supply chain will factor into valuation and what a seller can do to prepare his or her business properly?
So on the supply chain side in behavioral health, it's not, the supply is really your healthcare providers, right? And then the customers. But what has been challenging during COVID is just maintaining the facilities, right? I mean, you have one outbreak and you have an inpatient hospital setting. You need to be very careful with how you manage that. So as far as the challenges go in our space, that has been the biggest one. On the real estate side of things, there's many supply side challenges from metal to glass to cement to wood, and there's massive fluctuations and vacillations in the pricing. And that's a big challenge, and it's very difficult to deal with. And so you just you got to be careful to just check your prices very regularly on where the materials are going, and try to lock them in so you have some certainty as you move forward with those deals.
And do either of you have comments on the importance of diversifying customer or supplier base in this current world?
Well, certainly diversifying customer is very important. Being more in tech, it's been less of a supply chain issue. I think the COVID situation, sort of as Peter alluded to, has been tough around office and office space. We do lots of Zoom meetings. We're doing Zoom meetings or here. In terms of building a culture, it's not as good. And maybe I'm a little dated in that regard, but you can't replace sort of that coffee room chatter or the ability to walk into somebody's office. And that tends to be more efficient, particularly when you're building a business and there's just a lot of data flowing around altogether. But you can't mandate. There's no clear view on what it is. It's like, try to get people in, try to do it as much as you can, have a Christmas party, do what you can to try to keep that information flowing in the most informal way possible, because it can really drive efficiency.
Yeah, I can say that we've had times where there were comparisons made with other companies in our industry, and my answer is those are lifestyle companies, but we're a hard driving, fast charging company, and we need people whenever we can because it makes a big difference. Big difference.
People still buy from people they like.
For sure. No, like, and trust. Absolutely. So there should be no expectation among buyers that the asset, your company is perfect. What items from your experiences are considered acceptable to be imperfect, and then which items need to be perfect or as close to perfect as we get?
So being able to articulate what all those metrics are. So the key metrics that you're running for your business, the customer related, not just financial, your customer retention. What is your cost of acquiring a new customer? Your ability to be able to articulate that then allows an acquirer or a potential acquirer to see money in, money out. What does this equate to? Where are things broken? And your ability to be able to articulate what might not be working for any number of reasons in the business. That could be go-to-market, that could be back office, that could be product-oriented. The ability to be able to talk about that and talk about potential fixes or ways that those can be enhanced. Very similar to what I mentioned around board meetings before. Articulate and understand your own problems, and then to talk about how they can be improved upon, I think starts to dissuade anybody from going down their own rat holes, thinking that they found problems in your business and then knocking you up on valuation, which is the conversation that always happens.
Yes, you will have a battle over valuation. There's no question about that, right? That's the one certainty.
Right.
Yeah, I think, the gotta haves is you gotta have a vision, not just as to why you're successful today. You need to have a vision as to what problems that you're going to solve that are going to arise in the future. How are you taking care of all the stakeholders in your business with that solution? Perfect example in our space would be, COVID happens and, all of a sudden there's an opportunity in telehealth, right? Or people aren't traveling as much, so maybe you need to start accepting different kinds of insurance policies to increase your pool of folks that you're going to be attractive to. So, but most importantly is, here's the problem today. Outcomes is in our space a very important thing that folks are focusing on. It's a wildly challenging concept to get around and data to pull for, because you're treating addiction, and the recidivism rate is higher than anyone would like to talk about, right? So it's a bit of an imperfect science, but we have to come up with a solution on how we're going to address those questions. So it's just part of being prepared for the future while succeeding in the present.
Great. All right. So we've talked about the positive, the negatives. deal killers, pitfalls you've seen derailing high value. I'd love to hear from each one of you what you think some of those might be. Either deal killers with acquirers or pitfalls you see that really damage your value.
Sometimes people tend to oversell. They get very excited. They're looking for the deal. They're very excited for a valuation, and they may be, for any number of reasons, naive about what diligence will sort of bring along for them, whether that's a financial diligence or talking to customers or whatnot. So again, I think you want to be positive on your business. If you're a business owner or executive, you should be very excited, but you should also be very forthright about what's there. I've seen financial statements be changed on the fly. People sort of dig in. Many acquirers have teams of MBAs that are willing to go through your spreadsheets and find the errors. Make sure all that's very, very tight. Because that becomes the topic of conversation. Also understand what the comparables in your space are, yourself, not just from a banker or somebody who's also trying to talk you down into something else or telling you, typically it's this. Understand what the competitors, if they've been doing deals, how that relates to you, and then how you either differentiate for the better or understand how you might differentiate for the worse. And be efficient about it. Get to a no fast, get to a yes fast.
Should be prepared for someone to tell you your baby's ugly too, right?
All the time. I have started many conversations with, well, so your business has no value. Probably not the nicest thing to say, but
it's a fine line, right? Because you want to show aggressive growth, you want to show strong forward-looking numbers. But if you lose your credibility with your investor because you're puffing a little bit too much, it's hard to recover from that. And they're less likely going to be trusting any number in that presentation going forward. So just never put something on a piece of paper that you don't understand very well and you're able to defend it. Because when they do start picking at your EBITDA and your revenue assumptions and maybe even some of your cost projections, they will want an answer that isn't sales pitch. It needs to be based on facts.
And odds are these days you're going to be staying in that transaction for a while in some sort of earnout or work. Right. And so you don't want a completely miserable relationship.
They will tie you to that number that you wanted to put in there to make it look very exciting, and then pretty soon your compensation is right there with it. So another reason to make it realistic.
Dave, thoughts on pitfalls or deal killers?
I'd broaden that. Yeah, well, I would definitely broaden that comment that, first of all, you should just be honest all the time. Because if you lie about small things, or you not lie, it's not right. If you embellish small things, especially in the beginning, and it turns out that it's not true, it's going to damage your credibility on the large things. So really, like we teach our kids, right? Honesty is the best policy. And that's the first thing. Then, I'm also in tech, and I think we're in the realm of ideas, and there's often not, in the businesses that I've been involved with, there's not a track record of sales in some of them. It's been technology maturation. So you've got to be very clear-headed about, we call it in the government side of the business, which is the Triton side, they call it TRL, right? Technology readiness level. And there's a whole chart about what level, what. You have to be really clear-headed about, are you in the tech development? Not oversell that. What are the hurdles coming ahead? Often a reason for selling is to finance or more strategically align with the kind of gates that you're going to have to reach a higher level of technical maturity. So really what you're selling is your IP and your credibility of technology. So again, be honest, be straightforward, be clear about it. And you know what? Sometimes that does, you certainly will get knocked down on value, but also may discourage acquirers, but you've got to get the right acquirer. You've got to get somebody who's lined up with that strategic objective, as we talked about before. So,
yeah, I could not agree more. One interesting question you can always ask is, how many LOIs have they given out that they close? Guarantee you the acquirers know that. And then how many of the LOIs have been adjusted in price? They'll hate that you asked that, but it's a pretty good question to know.
Mm-hmm.
We are getting close to the end of our panel, so I want to go around and get final thoughts on value creation. Your biggest tip for our listeners here. Go around the room.
My thought on that is going to be always have an eye to solving tomorrow's problem, and look forward to how the landscape and your competitors are going to change, and make sure that you're solving the problems of your stakeholders for the future.
Awesome.
I think that's great advice. If you're sitting in a room full of investors or potential acquirers, their point of reference is going to be today and tomorrow. So they're going to want to know exactly how you're going to solve the problems and some of the challenges that are coming down the road. Supply chain today, staffing issues, whatever that is, that might not have been relevant 5 years ago when you were running the business, but you need to be able to address that right this moment.
Dave?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with those things. I believe, as we talked about earlier, the acquirer is your customer. It's a different kind of customer, but it's a customer. So you need to understand what his motivation is and what his sort of pain points are, and as just mentioned, absolutely be crisp with your answer about how that's going to be circumvented, and then of course be flexible with the financial arrangements that will give that acquirer the confidence that you can approach it, which could mean an earnout, some kind of structured earnout with very clear targets, and retention guarantees of people that will help you get there. You've got to make the acquirer feel comfortable about what you said you could deliver on, could really be, and you thought through those problems. Reiterating what you said.
Great. And I will just add that, many people don't plan their exit because they hear the word exit and they think that's the end of something, whether they've created it, whatever it is, and they fail to plan. And think about it in terms of accelerating the value in your business, because you're going to look to maximize those profits for somebody else. Why not do it while you still own the business? So looking at those factors that accelerate value from the moment you start the business all the way through can be really valuable. Then you're ready for an exit whenever that time may come. So that would be my last piece of advice. I want to thank my panelists very much. It's been an entertaining session. Appreciate all your time and insight. And I would encourage all of our guests here to join us for the Q&A panel that will be coming up shortly. Thanks very much. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.